Coming up on today's episode of the Salesman Podcast.
Yeah, you see people in your feed, they're posting each and every day and they're actually giving genuine insights. They're saying, look, I spoke to this customer last week, they asked me about this, here's some tips. Or they're giving videos to actively help you, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, all these different kind of tips. And over time, I think, wow, they've got so much knowledge in this space and they're openly sharing it without asking for details from me. They must know what they're talking about. So it goes without saying, you need to start creating content that's going to be relevant to them and thinking about questions that clients are coming to you with each day in and day out, and ways that you can bring insights, ways that you can bring value, and mixing up your content, not just doing text posts, but doing video and all sorts.
Hello, Sales Nation. My name is Will Barron, and I'm the host of the Salesman Podcast, the world's most downloaded B2B sales show. On today's episode, we have the legend that is Sam Dunning, and he is the co-owner and sales director of Web Choice UK, which you can find over at webchoiceuk.com. And on today's episode, we're asking the question, do salespeople need to create content? And spoiler alert, yes, of course you do, if you want to have success in modern B2B sales. Everything that we talk about in this episode is available in the show notes over at salesman.org. And with that said, let's jump right into it. Okay, so in today's episode, we're going to get into why salespeople need to create content. And I might be making a presumption here, so I'll tee up that presumption with this first question, Sam. And in the world that we're currently living in, with people working from home, content seems more important than ever from my perspective. Which is more important, right, to create new revenue? Is it the skill of creating content, or is it the skill of being able to, for example, sell on the phone?
It's a tough question, and I'm not sure if there is one specific answer. I think, if we start from scratch, I think in the future, possibly content could be, I always say content is king because it's a big part of what I do. And perhaps if I start with a little story about myself, Will, it might give us some context and help the audience understand how it's helped me. So probably about 8 to 12 months ago, I set myself a little task of creating content on, in my case, LinkedIn, because just like everyone listening, I'm a B2B sales professional. And I thought, hey, I've been neglecting LinkedIn. I think if I can put content out each and every day, something that's hopefully going to be a bit of value, whether it's a tip, whether it's a little video, maybe it's a question that I've had from my clients or prospects. So just giving insights really into what I do, questions I get on a day-to-day, and just really trying to help people with sales, or in my case, marketing as well. It could be useful. So I set myself that task to post each and every day. And over time, magically, I started getting people messaging on LinkedIn from the content that I was putting out and saying, look, Sam, can you help me with this project? Or I've got this project in mind. And so other people, this took weeks, this took months. It's not an overnight thing. Other people say, Sam, you sprung out from literally nowhere. I see all this content that you're engaging on, all this content you're putting out. First of all, who are you? Second of all, can you help me? So in my case, well, the content's been a huge part of helping me get thought leadership, helping me get inbound leads, and helping build brand or trust with people that I'm perhaps already talking to or thinking about doing business with, or people thinking up doing business with me, which we can perhaps tap into a bit more later. But on the flip side, is it more important than being able to sell on the phone? Well, I still don't think it's quite there. Even though I'm a big believer in content. Obviously, I run a digital marketing company, so I'm selling to people day in, day out. Sales skills are still key. Even if you can generate the lead, if you can't have a conversation with a prospect and bring them some sort of insight, show that you know what you're talking about, understand their world, understand any potential problems they may be facing, and if your product or service can actually help fix those and make their life better or make their world better, then it's kind of the two evils. They weigh up against each other, if that makes sense.
Of course. Well, it's chicken and egg, isn't it? How are you going to close a lead if you can't generate them? How are you going to generate leads? Or how are you going to close leads if, well, whatever the opposite of that terrible anecdote was? Okay, well, two things here, Sam. I think you're slightly underselling yourself. And I'm interested as to whether you popping onto my radar just by commenting on every single piece of content that we publish on LinkedIn, which is greatly appreciated, whether this was luck or whether there's actually strategy behind it. Because Sam, is it as simple as if we want to get in front of a B2B buyer, we just comment on all their posts, or is there further strategy behind that to make it not annoying and kind of add to the conversation?
Yeah, so I guess in my case, I had it quite good because in your case, Will, I've been a huge fan of the show, like I said, for a long time. So it was in my interest because I'm genuinely interested in the content that you put out, as should other sales professionals. I mean, your own personal development. So whether that's podcasts, whether that's watching videos, whether that's audio, is going to be a good thing to set in sales. But without going down that obstacle, that's why I was actively interested in the content you're putting out. But if you're actually engaging in people's content that you want to do business with. So whether these are prospects that you've added, in this case, we're talking about LinkedIn. So you've added those as connection, or whether it's people that have come inbound and you're having a conversation with them and then you've added them on LinkedIn perhaps, and then you start engaging with your content, it keeps you front of mind. So if you're commenting on their post, if you're saying, look, this video you just put out was great. In fact, I talked about this last week to a customer. Have you considered XYZ? It just strikes a conversation, and in my opinion, it's just a great way to keep front of mind throughout the process. For example, I've had deals where people have come inbound, perhaps through our website, and we've had conversations. They've gone cold, but because of the content that I was putting out on LinkedIn, because I was putting out videos daily, I was putting out posts daily, and all different bits and pieces, then they've come back just because they followed the content. In fact, without going down too much of a rabbit hole, there was one deal where I was talking to someone, I think it was on email or perhaps LinkedIn chat, and he asked for a call. So we wanted to discuss a sales project. I had a phone call with him at the time. It would have been a really long day. Mm-hmm. So it was about, I don't know, just before 5 p.m. I'd had a day of it. I'd had a bunch of sales calls. I was starting to get tired. I was getting hungry. I was getting thirsty. Anyway, he said, Sam, can you help me with this project? And it was an okay price sale, but I rushed the sales process. So instead of understanding his world, instead of understanding his needs and objectives for why he'd reached out to me and if we could help him do business, I rushed it. So I didn't follow a process. I just kind of said, look, this is going to be the price, in this case, maybe $5,000. Do you want to take it or do you want to leave it and part ways as friends? Which is terrible. Don't ever do that. And he said, I need to think about it, which again is a seller's worst nightmare. And I think a week later, he emailed me saying he went with someone else. Anyway, I thought nothing of it, carried on doing my daily content creation as well as my other tasks. About 3-4 months later, Will, he reached out to me. He said, Sam, I'll be honest with you. When we spoke before, I thought you were very rude and I didn't like it. But since then, from the content you're putting out, I can see you're genuinely passionate about what you do. You're actually giving tips and insights each and every day. And I want to do some business with you. Can we discuss this project? I was like, whoa. So that just shows the power of just being present in people's minds. Even when you think you've royally pissed someone off, they can come back because of what you're putting out each day in and each day out.
So I could share 50 anecdotes that'd be similar here, Sam. And this actually came up on a podcast last week, and it's on my to-do list. Literally on my iPad, there's a line that's essentially research this topic because I want to see if there's any data on it. But how much of staying top of mind, creating content, being in front of people, commenting, follow up over email, phone calls, how much of the effect that has do you think comes down to just sheer impressions of your name and face in front of someone versus you actually having to add content to them? Because I'm convinced if you put me and my face and Salesman.org in front of enough people, in front of one person enough times over a long enough period, people eventually just go, it's probably all right, this. I'll check it out. I'm convinced that that's the fact.
To be honest with you, as much as I shouldn't as a digital marketer stroke salesperson, I do agree with you because it's happened to me. Like I see people in my feed, and we can move this away from LinkedIn in a sec, but to other channels. But yeah, you see people in your feed, they're posting each and every day and they're actually giving genuine insights. They're saying, look, I spoke to this customer last week. They asked me about this. Here's some tips. Or they're giving videos to actively help you, whether it's sales, whether it's marketing, all these different kind of tips. And over time, I think, wow, they've got so much knowledge in this space, and they're openly sharing it without asking for details from me. They must know what they're talking about. So when I need that service, let's say they were selling a CRM solution, I'm probably going to reach out to them because I see them every day. I trust them. I see these text posts, I see these videos posts, I see these image posts. They must know what they're talking about. So I believe what they're selling, and I'm going to reach out to them. So I think it is a case of staying front of mind, and over time that compounds interest, and you feel that they're the one to reach out to.
Yeah, and I guess there's two layers to this, right? There is probably, and again, I genuinely want to sit down and research this. There'll be some cognitive bias somewhere when we see someone's face a number of times, we trust them. I'm sure there'll be data on that. But then you mentioned something there which is interesting, which is the time dilemma, or being at the right place at the right time dilemma. So we could all cold email, call someone, and if it's not the right moment for them, well, you can have a good crack at trying to sell them and influence them and try and convince them that this is the right time. But at a certain point, you're just trying to manipulate them to get the deal right. Probably a smarter strategy is to do what you outlined then, of consistent, regular, just small bits of value and communication and staying top of mind. Essentially what advertising has done for 100 years, with Coca-Cola being on every billboard, or back in the day, Marlboro being on the back of Formula One racing cars and everywhere else. I'm convinced that this just impression. Then when you come to make a decision, because you've had a need, the situation has changed, you've had a trigger event, they're the person you're going to go to by default, aren't they?
Exactly. And that's it, really. So whether it is someone that you've spoken to in the past, whether it is connections you've built up, or people in your network, then the whole main element of it is that because you're constantly on the top of their feed, because you're consistent, because you're showcasing you actually know what you're talking about. Over time, it is building that trust element, and they're going to be the one that you reach out to. And taking this on another angle, Will, on the content basis, I've had many arguments, or let's say constructive debates, with people on LinkedIn that say sellers shouldn't be marketers, and I completely disagree. What I feel is, well, I'm going to disagree because I'm a marketer stroke seller. So what I mean by that is that I actually think in this day and age, and as we drive forward the next few years, it's going to be so crucial that you're creating content. Why? Because you can't rely on marketing to hand you leads. And we all know cold calling is getting harder and harder, especially right now with everyone being at home. So you need their direct dials, you need their mobiles to get through to it. And a lot of the time, if they see an unknown number, they're probably not going to pick it up. So content is a way to break through. It's a way to actually drive your own inbound leads, rather than having to dial all day or do cold emails all day. It's a way to say, hey, marketing aren't giving me that many leads. Let's generate my own pipeline. So as well as the inbound leads, as well as my cold outreach, I've got my own steady flow of warm leads. So if I'm doing my LinkedIn post daily, if I'm engaging with my network, that's one source. And then perhaps we can talk about this in a sec. Well, there's ultimately creating content comes down to what you're comfortable with. Now, if you're a B2B salesperson, it goes without saying that you should be on LinkedIn, but other options you may want to consider, things like what we're doing now, podcasts, whether that's creating your own or going on other people's, looking at a blog, and ultimately, you've got to decide what form channels of content you're comfortable with. But it's no longer a case of, I'm a salesperson, I want to do my 9 to 5. I believe if you want to continually smash and beat your quota, beat your revenue goals, you've got to go above and beyond. You've got to do above what every other seller does. And a part of that, as many people listening to this might hate me for saying, you've got to create content. You can't rely on marketing to do the tough work for you.
For sure. And I think it's worth underlining here that I don't believe that this is a hamster wheel that you get on and you have to create content forever and you never get off it, right?
No. And got to be a balance.
Well, I think that more than a balance, there's a compounding effect of all of this. So I now produce less content than what I did 3 years ago, 4 years ago. We were daily at one point with the podcast. And once that if you imagine a big flywheel for the audience, once that gets a turning, then you can slow down and perhaps focus on quality, or you can focus on going on other people's podcasts and building that bit of PR and building yourself as an expert in the industry, things we talk about on the show all of the time. But with that said, you mentioned the word being comfortable here, Sam. What does it mean if we are choosing a content platform or type of content that we are comfortable to produce? Should we all just be doing LinkedIn because that's performing the best, or should we focus in on what perhaps naturally we're going to be better suited at?
Yeah, so it goes without saying, and I know you've had a lot of guests that have talked on about going on LinkedIn, so that's a no-brainer. If you're a B2B sales professional, your ideal customer is probably going to be on there. So it goes without saying you need to start creating content that's going to be relevant to them, and thinking about questions that clients are coming to you with each day in and day out, and ways that you can bring insights, ways that you can bring value, and mixing up your content, not just doing text posts, but doing video and all sorts.
And sorry, Sam, to interrupt. Just pause on that for a second. What does it mean to create to share an insight, right? What would be an example of yourself doing that?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, there's tons of ways that I come up with content ideas. I'm fortunate because I've got a podcast running, so I can use snippets of that and chop up bits and pieces of that where I need to. Also, sometimes, like let's say I'm on a call with a prospective client or existing customer, they might say, in my case, I'm in digital marketing. Whilst I do sales, I'm a marketer too. So they might say, look, how can I get more inbound leads from my website? So I'll say, look, I was asked this today. This is the answer. This is probably going to be useful to people in my network. So I'll put it out as a question on LinkedIn. Or it might just be that I'm taking the dog out for a walk. Something comes to my mind. I might think like, yes, I think it was yesterday or the day before, I said saying cold calling is dead is like saying SEO is dead. It's a load of BS. You can still reach your ideal customers. So it's essentially making notes on my phone when things come into my head and using those, using real questions I get answered in the real world, using other interviews that I get to chop bits and pieces up. So it's actually using different things that happen to you, taking notes of those things, and then using those as content. So it doesn't come to like 9 a.m. in the morning and you've started your day and then you're struggling to think of content. You've already got this list that you're starting to compile from things that actually happen in your working day or when you're out and about. So you can use it as a useful bit and piece of content.
And do you use any tools to schedule on LinkedIn? Are you doing this in real time, as in you're walking your dog, you pull out your phone and you just throw that out there? How do you manage all of this? Because I find, and I do this personally, depending on, I have a couple of members of our team that's on my back constantly to post. Otherwise, I'd be super scatty with it all. How do you make this part of your routine?
Yeah, so I'm probably not the best example, but I just use my phone app. So I just use the iPhone Notes app and just put a whole bunch of ideas as they come into my head so I don't forget them, drill them down on there. And I just tend to do my posts in the morning. So 8 in the morning or wherever, when I come back from the gym, I'll just chuck those posts up 8 o'clock each morning. And then I've got them ready. And like I say, I don't have to worry because I've already made the list of things on my phone. So I don't have to panic and mess about in the morning and waste time. I can just focus on the productivity for the day and get selling, really.
That's the perfect example. Why did you just say you might not be a good example? That is the best way to go about doing it. Have a little bit of a backlog. So if you're not feeling inspired in that moment, and then you've got just in your notes to copy. I should just copy and paste it over. That's perfect, right?
Yeah, man. And going back to your question about channels that you're comfortable with, comfortable is probably not the best answer. So I'll give you a quick example of myself. So I started a podcast back in December of this year. Why did I do it? Because I love sales. I love learning from people smarter than me, much like yourself, Will. And I wanted to get some leads for myself. It gives me a chunk of content to put on LinkedIn because I can use the video. I can recite it for blogs, and I can split up all this content into good stuff. So that helps me build brand. I wasn't necessarily comfortable. So as you know, Will, I managed to get you as one of the first guests on the show because I was engaging on your content regularly, trying to ask you insightful questions and all this and that. And eventually managed to convince you to come on the show. And yeah, as you'll see from my podcast, I started pretty nervous. I was umming and ahhing all the time. I was sweating. My podcast background looked terrible. My audio was probably awful. My internet was terrible. And over time, you get more and more comfortable. The production gets better, but the key is to start. So comfortable is probably not the best word. You probably do need to come out of your comfort zone. But even if you're not comfortable with a podcast, other forms of creating content might be just doing interviews. So whether that's a Zoom interview with your ideal customers, maybe even without video, maybe just audio, or maybe starting your own blog. But the key is to start creating. And I'm not saying content is the be all and end all. It could only take like an hour of your day, but it's something you need to slowly start over time. Because like I say, you cannot rely on marketing to constantly pass your leads. You need to go out there. You need to break out of your comfort zone and start creating.
Yeah, maybe we should have said this from the top of the show, right? I feel like there's two types of salespeople who are listening to this. And both are appropriate and both are fine. I've got no beef with that. One salesperson wants to go to work. They want to pick up the phone. They want to send some emails. They want to hit the target just about, and they're happy. And that provides them with whatever funds they want for their lifestyle, and they're happy with that. Then you've got another salesperson who is perhaps scared that if they just did the basics, if they just hit target, that they're essentially fallible, that they could be, especially in the time that we're living in right now with COVID, they could be made redundant. And so they want to go one step further. They want to create content. They want to become known as an expert. They want to become, essentially anti-fragile as a salesperson. So just to kind of prerequisite the rest of the conversation on these lines, I feel like if you want to go down that second route, you're doing what we did with one thread, and I'll explain how we're multi-threaded with this in a second. But we just started with the Salesman Podcast, which then we broke down into a blog post, which then quotes from the guests became images that we shared on social media. And so we started with a couple of interviews a week, and then that turns into, over time, 30, 40 pieces of content from each interview. And I feel, and tell me if you agree with this, Sam, I feel like that's a really good starting point for someone. It could be a YouTube video, it could be a long form blog post, whatever it is. I feel like we should create one piece of solid content a week and then break that up into sub bits of content that all point back to the original source. And I found, when I've been teaching this over at salesman.org, that's the best way we've found to build thought leadership in a short amount of time.
Definitely. So this is kind of bringing out the marketing side of me, but it's going to be useful for salespeople alike. So like you say, a podcast is an awesome piece of pillar content because you can record it on Zoom or Skype like we're doing. And then from there, you've got maybe 30, 40, maybe an hour interview that you can break up into so much usable content. And especially if your show is lined up, so you're actually interviewing ideal customers, or you're interviewing people that you could potentially do business with, or you're sharing insights with this interview that's going to be useful to your network, and as a piece of that could get you leads over time, then you've got the video, like you say, you can put it out to YouTube, you've got the audio that you can put out on the podcast channels, and then you can snip it up. It doesn't take much time to edit up. You can break those down into 60-second snippets that you can put, like you say, out on social. You can put it into quotes. So there's so much reusable content and what we call one piece of pillar content. And like you say, you've only got to do one interview a week and you're away. And going back to your first point, Will, there's two types of salespeople. Completely agree, and I'm definitely on the second fence. So you've got the people that want to do 9 to 5, want to just about hit target, or maybe sometimes miss target, and they're happy to earn a bit of cash. Or you've got the second branch of people who understand sales as a profession where you can earn a heck of a lot of more than your friends, than your colleagues, and your family. Some of which will hate you for it, some of which will respect you for it. But what that means, in my personal opinion, is that you need to be not scared or not afraid of going above and beyond. So it means, yes, you might need to spend some time on the weekends, as I'm sure you do as well. Well, yes, you might need to spend some hours before 9 to 5. So salespeople, you've heard it at first. 9 to 5 is definitely not for you if you're in sales. So you need to go above your comfort zone. You need to start planning what you're going to do. So whether it's a podcast, whether it is actively posting on LinkedIn. In my case, I do that outside of work hours, and putting that time aside to make these things happen. Otherwise, you're not going to be one of the quota breakers. And I think most of the salespeople that come on your show will probably agree that if you're just in it for the standard hours, you're probably not going to do as well as you could.
Sure.
I'm not saying you need to work all the time. I do agree you need a work-life balance, but it's just going that extra mile, you know?
And if you could hear Sam giggling in the middle of his talking there, because I'm flailing around in the background and I'm trying to plug the MacBook in because it's throwing up all kinds of low battery messages. So with that said then, Sam, there's one thing, and you said this, I've highlighted it on the page here when I wrote it down. You said the word genuine at the top of the show. Now, I've no idea what context you said that in, but that word seemed important as you said it. So how do we do all of this? Because I guess what we're talking as if marketers here, right? And I feel the difference between, or one of the key differences between sales and marketing, is that salespeople are representing themselves as an individual. So you can be entirely genuine, versus most marketers are representing a brand. They're telling a story about avatars and people that don't really exist. And so they can push the truth, they can spin it a little bit. So how do we create content that is genuine and true to ourselves and perhaps makes us slightly uncomfortable?
Sure. Well, I think if you're creating content, I think first of all, you've got to be sold either on what your product or service is, or if you're not actually interested or keen on what your product or service is, you've got to be passionate about the outcomes. So how it actually helps people. So even if it is a boring generic product, whether it's CRM software or something simple, not that I'm saying CRM is boring, but you might find it boring. You've got to be positive on a way that helps people. So it helps people speed up their workflow. It helps them get on the phones, sell more, because they don't have to do the manual task of putting all the data into the CRM that we all know and loathe as sales professionals. So you've got to be that's part of it, actually being passionate about your product or how it helps. And then from there, it's putting across, like we were saying, genuine insights in what you're creating that you've spoken to people about in the past, perhaps in your conversations over the phone, perhaps through questions that prospects have talked to you about, perhaps through stories that you've shared with prospects, or maybe case studies. So maybe you've had a client that you've taken from let's go back to the CRM example, that was struggling with all the data and time it was taking them to do their CRM updates. Maybe it was taking them 30 minutes or 40 minutes each and every day to add all their leads and add all their cold calls in there. And then you introduce your software, and they had all this free time left in their day to sell. And as a result of that, their revenue went up by 10% each month. So it's sharing these stories, sharing these ways that you've helped people. And that's a great content piece in itself, because that can be put into a video, that can be put into a text post, that can be used in your actual conversations you're having with people on the phone. So it's an element of several things, Will. And yeah, I think that's a big part of it, really. I think having that passion in some element of what you do is quite important, because personally for me, I've sold things in the past. Like in my younger years, I sold ink cartridges over the phone. And whilst that was a very profitable thing, and whilst I could sell a heck of a lot of ink to old people answering me in midday, it kind of felt bad, because over time I was thinking, these people are only buying from me because there's someone to talk to, and probably all their kids have left home and all this and that. And there was no longevity in it, really. So I think that's a big part of, I think, passions and genuineness is a big part of the selling profession, in my opinion.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll share my thoughts on this, in that I, until past 12 months ago, didn't care about sales training at all. The only thing I cared about was getting myself, my audience, and even our internal team over at salesman.org better sales results. And it wasn't until I'd put in, we've been doing the show now 5 years, and we've had our own training product for, say, like 2 or 3 years now. It wasn't until I started to learn I wanted to have the outcome of better outcomes for our members over at salesman.org and people who listen to the podcast. It wasn't until that was my main focus that I realized that, most sales training sucks. That's why I don't like it, because it's boring as shit. So then I started reading books on education and teaching and how to explain things. There's a cracking book. I think it's just called Explainers. I'll put a link to it in the show notes to this episode. And it's all about just how to explain either complicated science or complicated business terminology, or how a product works. And just using that simple framework has allowed me to improve my, student outcomes dramatically. And so I'm now really passionate about education and sales training when I wasn't before. So the point of that rant was that as long as you can find one thing in the mix, whether it's your product, whether it's your industry, whether it's your customers, whether it's your customers' customers. If you were selling products to teachers, you might not really care about the teacher's experience, but you might really care about how the kids benefit from the back end of it. As long as you can find one thing to focus on that will motivate you to get this content flywheel spinning, passion tends to come on the back of all this. I don't know if you've had any experiences that are similar to that, Sam.
Yeah, I was going to say, and there's multiple elements to that, really. Like you say, it comes at the start of the sale. You come across genuine, you come across actually interested when you're talking to your potential clients and the conversations that you have. It gives you ideas to put out content. And then when you're actually servicing the client, when you're actually delivering the product or checking how the solution's going, if you're invested in it, if you're actually having conversations with them a few months after they've bought, saying, look, how's things going? How are you getting on? Making sure that perhaps your technical team that's actually delivering the product is doing the best they can, making sure your customer's getting the best use of the product that they can, and you're answering questions that they might have based on experience with other customers. It shows that you're genuinely invested in them, and they're more likely to be a customer for the long term. And we all know the stats that show that how hard it is to get a new customer compared to keeping your existing one. So if you can show genuine curiosity in how things are going with your existing clients, it means you've got to spend less time scrapping about creating content, less time making cold outreach, because you're maintaining your existing customer base through being genuine, through being passionate about their outcomes, which in result is going to help you hit your quota, break your quota, and obviously make more commissions.
For sure. Okay, so we'll wrap up with this, Sam. So clearly, you're co-founder of an organization. You're the sales director over there, right? What are you doing right now in the kind of time we're living in the middle of COVID, where LinkedIn has just seemingly turned down the reach on their algorithm? So people that have been throwing content on LinkedIn have been complaining about this for the past couple of weeks or so. What are you doing personally, content-wise, with all this in mind, right this second, to generate new leads?
Sure. So I'll go through it from head to toe, really. As you know, I'm doing a podcast, so that's a big part of what I do. And like we talked about repurposing, we do a lot. So we actually put the podcast out live on LinkedIn, so as a live video call. And in my case, I interview all kinds of business leaders, business experts, and sales experts. 1, because they're smarter than me. 2, because they give value to my network. And 3, because they're linked to, we offer digital marketing solutions. We can talk about digital marketing. We can talk about sales. We can talk about business growth, give value to the audience. But my point is, it goes as a live podcast on LinkedIn. It gets then chopped up to YouTube, gets chopped up for the audio channels, gets chopped up into smaller clips, blog posts, all these beautiful repurposing channels that I can then put in as content daily for my LinkedIn feed. So that's one way that I build trust with for my network, and that helps me get leads and build credibility over time. Otherwise, yes, I'm putting out content daily on LinkedIn. Text-only posts have got the best reach. Like you say, Will, that LinkedIn algorithm's been absolutely hammered. So you've still got to create. It's just annoying. It's harder than before. Other ways, if we keep on LinkedIn for a sec, I'm connecting. You can still, even if you're on a basic account, you can connect with up to 50 new connections per day. So if you sell, for example, to marketing directors, to sales directors, whatever your ideal customer profile is, it still makes sense to connect with those. And over time, they'll create your content, you build trust with them. And other ways is, a big part of what we do is YouTube, is the podcast. So we're pushing that out. We're doing the blog.
What do you see the most traction on? What one thing do you do, Sam, from a leads perspective? Forget about the marketing of just eyeballs and brand and all that bullshit. What do you do, or what do you say, or where do you put it that people go, hey, Sam, can you tell me more about this? I think we have this problem.
Yeah. So I think the most important thing is to work out that social media. So in my case, a lot of my leads aren't from our website, are through LinkedIn. So the biggest way I get content is actually thinking about problems or issues that my ideal customer face in their day-to-day, and working that out without shoving my product or service down people's necks, working out questions that I get on my day-to-day around that, I can purpose into content. So whether that's when I'm out and about walking the kid and I just think of a video, I'll shoot that, I'll put it on LinkedIn. Whether that's I had a conversation, I told a story, a case study of how our product helps someone get 10% more sales or get 10% more time throughout the year, putting that out. So thinking about things in your day-to-day, so people make content more difficult than it is. You've just got to think about the conversations you've had, like my earlier point, note that down on your phone app, and then bang it out. And those are the ways, because people relate to it, because you're actually telling things that are real and not making up some BS story like we see on these influencer pods or things on LinkedIn that get 10,000 comments, but all the comments are saying, yes, I agree, you're so cool. We want people that actually care about what we're putting out, even if your post or your content's only getting 10 likes, as long as it's actually useful for your ideal customer. That's what matters, because over time, that's what's going to get you the inbound inquiries, which is what you want as a sales professional.
Perfect. That is the best way to sum all of this up. Don't go after those big numbers. Even me, we generate, I think it's like, say, 20% of our revenue for the organization comes from the podcast advertising and the different projects we run with HubSpot, Salesforce, all these organizations, right? I don't care about, most of the time, I don't care about hitting thousands of likes or thousands of views on a post, and you alluded to it there. I get asked to join these LinkedIn pods all of the time, and I turn them down because as soon as you start engaging within a pod of individuals and you're trying to game the algorithm, it might work for a little bit. And we've seen LinkedIn have just turned down their algorithm right now. You're going to probably see a ton more ads on there because they're going to start turning up the percentage of ads in the feed and that side of things. Basically, just turn into Facebook, right? As soon as you start trying to manipulate things, as soon as you start to create content that you think will do well, even though it's not real or it's nothing to do with the product or service, or it's nothing to do with the end goal that you have, you lose that. I'll come back to that word, that ability to be genuine. And I think that is what salespeople have, the marketers don't. And I really appreciate that kind of example there, Sam, of how we can just be genuine, put out content, and it will generate leads if we do it for long enough and consistent enough with the right people in the right environment. And with that, Sam, I want you to tell us more about the podcast, because you've alluded to it. I want you to tell us the name of it, where we can find it, and where we can find out more about you as well, sir.
Sure thing. Thanks very much, Will. So it's Sam's Business Growth Show. That's the podcast. Please do check it out. We interview business leaders each and every week to help you generate more sales. If you're part of a business, it's going to help your business grow as well. Otherwise, please do connect with me on LinkedIn. Tell me you saw me on Will's show. It's Sam Dunning, Dunning for Dunning. Please do hit me up on LinkedIn. Otherwise, if your business needs more clients inbound and you're tired of making cold calls and you want more leads through digital marketing, it's webchoiceuk.com. Really appreciate it, Will.
You're more welcome, sir. I'll link to all that in the show notes to this episode over at salesman.org. And just a final, put a period and full stop on this. Sam didn't exist to me like a year ago, and now he comments so much, adds so much value to our community as well, and is stirring up conversations in our posts. That Sam is a true case study of this in practice. So I appreciate you, Sam. I appreciate all you're doing on LinkedIn within our community. And with that, I want to thank you again for joining us on the Salesman Podcast.
Cheers.